Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to part 2 of a special Writing Out Loud interview with best-selling author Elmore Leonard. Thank you for staying with us for a second segment, Elmore. Your new book, The Hot Kid, set in Oklahoma, 1920s and 30s Oklahoma. Why Oklahoma and why the 20s and 30s?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. There's something about Oklahoma that fascinates me, that draws me to Oklahoma, and even the fact that I'd lived here only a very short time when I was about 5 years old. Oklahoma is in the center of the United States. It's very American, even though when my mother would say that when she was a child, and when we were living there, when she was a child, Oklahoma was Oklahoma Territory. You know, it wasn't a state yet. There were there were maybe 45 states: Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And there's always something about Oklahoma that I've liked, and the idea of building and I've had characters from Oklahoma would come to Detroit to get in trouble, or as law enforcement officers. But I wanted to finally set one in Oklahoma, and I wrote a book. Michael Chabon asked me if I would write something for McSweeney's magazine that he had been named editor for an edition, and he said it's going to be about pulp fiction. He said, "Can you write a pulp story?" I said, "Can I write a pulp story? Are you kidding?" And so I wrote one called Showdown at Chakotah. Then there was a subhead that said how Carlos Webster did something and became a well-known lawman, something like that. They left off the headline. They forgot to put Showdown at Chakotah in the magazine. And I said, you forgot the headline and the title. And he said, "Oh yeah, oh sorry," and that was that, because that's a very laid back kind of a magazine. Well, finally to do and that story, I open this book, The Hot Kid, with much of that particular McSweeney story. I added oil. I had to add, as soon as we start to research and we find out Tulsa was the oil capital of the world 50 years ago, more, much more, 100 years ago, I had to get into oil. And the research, though, was fascinating, reading books like Voices from the Oil Field, reading about, I asked my researcher, Greg Sutter, I said, there's a woman who won an auction to get her son's name in my book, in my next book. And these are charity events where you'll bid, and most of them, and a number of people, their names are in the book, but this woman bid $17,000 to get her deceased son, who was killed in an automobile accident, 18 years old, and his name was Albert Antonelli, Anthony Antonelli. And so I said to Greg Sutter, my researcher, I said, find out if there are any Italians in Oklahoma. And he got me a book, The Italians in Oklahoma, and there they were. Most of them were coal miners at that time. So anything I needed, he would get for me, and he would get for more than that. He would always bring in more stuff that he had a feeling I could use, so that the development of the story, The Hot Kid, Greg came up with the title. He said, I've heard you say to interviewers that when you started writing, you had hoped to become the hot kid, but that writing Westerns, it was difficult to gain any notoriety, you know. He said, why don't you call it The Hot Kid? Because this guy in the book, he wants to be the most famous lawman in America. And his opponent, the antagonist, wants to be public enemy number one.
This is Jack Belmont.
Jack Belmont, yeah, which is the name of my first great-grandchild. And that's it. So then I just throw all these characters in and let's see what happens.
You actually came to Oklahoma yourself to do some research and made a quick trip here. What are you looking for when you make one of these quick research trips? How do you get a feel for a region when you visit it like that?
Well, it's not so much anything specifically that I'm looking for. It's just I want to see what it looks like. For example, I noticed all these full, medium-sized trees all over eastern Oklahoma. You know, and what are they called? I forgot. Oh, nuts. Things like that. This part of Oklahoma is so green. It's very, very green, and it's kind of up and down. It's somewhat hilly. And that was important to me. When Greg goes out to research an area, I always say, find out what the trees are. I've got to know that, you know, because then I can begin to picture it. And then I can begin to sound like I know what I'm talking about when I describe the little that I might describe the land, you know.
And you enjoy visiting with the people. I've heard so many people say, oh, I met Elmore Leonard when he was in Oklahoma, and you visited the state penitentiary and actually sat in Old Sparky.
Yeah, well, I didn't sit in it, but I
It was unplugged.
Maybe I did sit in it.
Yeah, there's a picture. There's a picture of you sitting in Old Sparky.
Yeah, in that little house outside the walls. It's got all sorts of...
Yeah, so you absorbed a lot of local color pretty quickly. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about Carl Webster. You'd written about him in earlier stories and were familiar. What was it about him that intrigued you enough that you wanted to stick with this character a little bit more?
Well, for me, it's difficult to go with a law enforcement officer as the main character who's just doing his job. What's his problem outside of his job, you know? But here's a guy I thought maybe the reader might wonder about. What? He wants to be famous. And how does he go about being famous? He makes sure there are people there when he shoots somebody who can testify to it and can say what he has told the bad guy, the opponent, that I just want to warn you that if I have to draw my weapon, I will shoot to kill. So he's never said this to a newspaper reporter directly, but witnesses all say it because they love it, you know. And then, of course, the readers love it because he's an heroic guy defending the law. So it was fun. And I had a book of ads on what was in, say, in the early 30s. The kind of dresses, the kind of suits, the kind of booze, the kind of shoes, everything in ads, coffee, whatever. And so I could refer to things like that a character is a character who reads a lot of magazines and will harp on Carl's dad, Virgil. Yeah. Virgil was in Cuba Libre. And he was a Marine in the Spanish-American War on the battleship Maine when it blew up in Havana Harbor, and he was blown into the plot of the book. So he comes home with a Cuban wife. A few years later, she gives birth to Carl and dies. So then a woman is brought in as a wet nurse, a young woman, who I say that when Carl lost interest in her breasts, his dad kind of
stepped in.
So his dad began to appreciate her, and she became his housekeeper and eventually over 38 years, his common law wife, you know. But,
you know, it's interesting that reviewers have said that Carl is the hot kid, but also Jack Jack Belmont is kind of a hot kid, or wants to be a hot kid. How would you describe Jack?
Well, that's true, except that I say in the book that he, by this writer for True Detective magazine, Anthony Antonelli, he says that he wants to be the hot kid of the Marshal Service. And that's that. The other guy who wants to be who is sort of a hot kid in that he's a show-off, like Carl, but he's bad. We first meet him, he's trying to blackmail his dad. To give him $10,000 a month. And that fails. and most of the things he gets into, he fails at. And it makes him mad. And he'll just then move on to try something else. I think that the outlaws, that the criminals, all of mine are dumb, because I think criminals in general are dumb, or they wouldn't have become criminals. You can't win. So but he's a colorful guy, and he's kind of spoiled, and he's a little bit whiny now and then, and just to make him real is the point of it. Was what I'm trying to do.
Then there's the great character Anthony.
Anthony is writing the way writers for True Detective wrote. He writes in a purple passion kind of a way, overwrites, but he's very popular, and he's glad that he's gotten out of newspaper writing where he was so restricted, and now in True Detective he can let himself go, and. In
other words, he's not following the 10 rules for writing that Elmore Leonard has set down.
No, he is not. But it's been pointed out that I don't make fun of him. I let him do what he does,
It wouldn't have worked otherwise, would it?
No. Because in my books, I don't make judgments. I don't judge characters. It's up to because I don't want you to be aware of me, so I can't be in there judging characters and telling you this is a bad guy. You have to just see for yourself that, this is the antagonist.
So many of the reviewers have been pointing out, and this book, The Hot Kid, has gotten rave reviews, but so many are pointing out that this is different from your other novels. Is it different, and if so, how?
Well, I felt all the way through when I was writing it that it was different, and it took longer. There were interruptions, but it took almost a year to write this book. And it's no longer than any of my other books that take 6 months. And two of the stories in there I pick up almost intact. Why did it take so long? Well, I guess I was just trying a little harder. But I didn't have, it's not a contemporary story. I can't use today's speech. Nobody talks in a jazzy kind of a way or a street kind of a way. They're fairly normal. Well, they're maybe in a rural kind of a way, but that's about it. And some expressions from the 30s, but you have to be careful when you're doing a particular period that you don't overdo words that like swell. I bet I've only used swell in that book once or twice.
I noticed that, and I thought you captured the dialogue very well. It's authentic but memorable at the same time. You capture everyday speech, but in a way that makes it stand out and more significant than it might be otherwise. Stephen King has said that this is your best novel. Do you agree with him?
I don't know. It was up because before this, people said, "What's your favorite book?" And always Freaky Deaky comes to mind, where I bring back to the present, bring from the 60s and 70s those countercultural people who were making bombs and were demonstrating against the United States at the time, and I liked that book a lot. And but I like them all, really.
Word has it that you're writing a follow-up book.
Yeah.
It features Carl Webster. It's going to be serialized in the New York Times. Is that right?
That's where we're going. They've asked me if I would write a 12-part serial to begin in September. And I said, well, I think I've got a book that'll work. I'm going to move this one ahead 10 years to 1944 and bring in over 350,000 German prisoners of war into this country in over 500 camps, and get my marshal involved with one of them, at least one of them in particular.
Is there any chance that Oklahoma can become one of the major Elmore Leonard settings in the same way as, say, Detroit or Florida?
I think it's happening, yes, sure.
Well, it's very exciting. We love it. I love going here and seeing the place names. So we're sitting today in the Mayo Hotel, and there are many references to the Mayo and the Hot Kid. And my only quarrel with you is that you only mentioned my hometown of Tahlequah once in the book, and we have lots of crime, Elmore. We would just love to see you exploit some of the things.
What kind of crime do you have there?
Just every kind. We'll speak off camera. I'll give you some tips about that. We've been focusing on your male characters, but you create some wonderful women characters in the Hot Kid. Luli. Oh, she's a great character. Did you have fun writing her character?
I had fun writing Luli, and others too. Crystal Davidson.
Yeah.
There was another one.
Virgil's wife.
Huh?
Virgil's wife was a very interesting character. The one that read all the magazines.
Right. Narcissa.
Yeah.
Who's Creek, I think.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And I have fun with the women because over the years in developing women characters, I don't think of them necessarily as women. I mean, I don't think, all right, now what's different about her because she's a woman? No, I just think about her as a person in these situations.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they're very believable. In fact, I wanted to talk to you about this wonderful collection of stories that you've written over the years called When the Women Come Out to Dance. Great book. I mean, a lot of your women characters. Kieran Cisco. What do you think about Kieran Cisco?
Kieran Cisco was okay, and she was a TV series.
Yeah.
For 6 parts, I think it was.
And then
they canceled it. But I didn't. Well, they really didn't capture anything of my writing in the TV series. They just used her name, you know, and they didn't know how to really present her.
Do the women in this collection have anything in common that you see? They're all unique individuals, but are there some common denominators?
I'm not sure.
One reviewer described them as strong women who all needed something.
Like
lots of things, just depending, but that's very interesting. I just wondered if you saw them in that way, or if you even think in terms of overall things.
I don't think that way. I don't think of this is the kind of woman I want, and will list attributes or failings or whatever. No, I just get the person into a scene, and let's hear her talk.
Do you have somebody read through early drafts of your work, or do you just rely on your own voice?
Greg Sutter will read parts of it as I will write them. I'll send him parts of the book, and it will help his research.
Oh, sure.
You know. No, I don't.
I just wonder if you listen to feedback. For example, the mystery writer Elizabeth George has been criticized by many fans because she killed off one of her major characters, and people are a little irritated with her. And she knew that was going to happen. I just wonder if you are sensitive to that kind of feedback particularly.
Well, there hasn't been anything in particular. I have killed characters that people objected to this happening. I don't rely on my editor. For example, about the most serious thing my editor for the past 12 years, not my current editor, but one I had for 12 years, would say was, this book ends awfully abruptly. And I would say, yeah, but it's over. She would say, why don't you just let it coast just a little bit without adding anything? And, you know, you do that. You write a couple more pages and take 2 out.
Who are some of the writers you admire?
Well, Hemingway. I started with Hemingway. I learned a lot from Ernest Hemingway until I discovered that I don't think he had much of a sense of humor, if any. But I can still read his 49 or whatever it is short stories and feel thrills, you know, certain passages. Richard Bissell is another one. Richard Bissell wrote stories set on the Mississippi River. He was a very current, he wrote in the 50s, but he was a very contemporary writer, and his people were you know, hip for the time. Bissell wrote 7.5 Cents, which became the Pajama Game. And John O'Hara, I learned a lot about writing dialogue reading John O'Hara. And, of course, John Steinbeck. And
have you read Grapes of Wrath? Of course you have, I'm sure. I just wondered if that influenced your impressions of Dust Bowl, Oklahoma at all.
I didn't read the Grapes of Wrath.
Have you not read it?
No.
Well, I guess when I was reading The Hot Kid, I noticed there is a dust cloud on the horizon.
There's one.
Yeah, one. There was one. And you point out that we're on the edge of the Dust Bowl. And,
yeah.
You know, I was glad you pointed that out, because so stereotypically, all of Oklahoma's been the Dust Bowl, and that wasn't the case. And
but I remember dust, when I was here, I remember a wall of dust moving like that, and you could see the edge of it.
It's a bad feeling, isn't it?
Terrible. But it's all, how far is it off? I don't know. But you could see it going along like that. And who was the other guy? Oh, I wasn't influenced by Raymond Chandler or Hammett. I wasn't influenced by any of those guys who were so popular in the 40s when I was getting into reading a lot just for the sake of learning. And because I didn't learn anything from them.
Does it irk you to be compared to them? I read an article the other day that said you've been now elevated to the station of a Dashiell Hammett or a Raymond Chandler, and I just wondered how you felt about that.
No, I don't appreciate that.
Well, I was thinking you probably didn't. I wanted to talk to you about your children's book, A Coyote's in the House. What made you decide to reach out to a younger audience?
My Hollywood agent said, I think you should write a children's book about an animal, because any time you have an animal in one of your books, you always do something from the animal's point of view. Well, I have to, because I never do it from my own point of view.
Sure.
If the animal is the only one in the scene, you know, I got to do the animal. And the main example was an alligator in Maximum Bob, and the alligator smelled dog. I don't know how that would translate, but that's what he smelled, because he likes dog. And when it made his way into this house to get some, you know, a cute little dog. So I started writing the children's book from a dog's point of view, and the dog was a former movie star who was bored now, living in the Hollywood Hills with the family, with little kids. And he would watch the coyotes up on the hill at night, playing around, chasing mice and so on. And he was thinking, I should go up there and join them. They're having fun. Well, I wrote 3 or 4 pages, and I was bored. I didn't like the dog's point of view. And I realized then I'm writing from the wrong character's point of view, that I should be writing from the coyote. So I named him Antoine, A-N-T-W-A-N, and he's a hip Hollywood coyote, you know? He loves movie star garbage, because movie stars, the ones living up in the hills, they buy good stuff, and they buy too much. They don't eat everything, and they throw it away. And then he'll go and knock over the garbage can, and there it is. He likes sushi. He likes all sorts of things. And but he runs into the dog, and the dog takes him into the house. And Antoine has never been in a house before, you know. And he's introduced to the way this dog lives. He's introduced to Miss Betty, who is a show poodle. And Miss Betty looks at the coyote and, you know, is scared to death. And Antoine walks over to Miss Betty and sniffs at her, and he says, "Girl, you smell good enough to eat." And he's serious.
Absolutely serious. Truer words never spoken. You have grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I think you said 13 grandchildren?
Yeah.
And 2 great-grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
What's been the response from within the family for this book?
Grandchildren who read the book say, it's different. It's so different. And they love, what's the book that's so popular now, the book that the English woman has written?
Oh, Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. You know, they whip right through Harry Potter, but they say, but this one, everybody talks, you know, in such a real way, in such a realistic way, and it kind of stops them a little bit. And they'll have to get used to the rhythm of the writing, I think. But they say they like it. Well, what are they going to say?
Well, sometimes kids can be pretty honest. They can be your toughest critics. So I think if they like it, they say they like it, they probably do. The publication of The Hot Kid, your 40th book, has given occasion to all kinds of publicity. You were on the cover of the Sunday magazine of the New York Times. Then you were profiled in the Times, and you got a rave review in the New York Times. What does this kind of acclaim mean to you at this point in your life? We just have a little less than a minute left.
I'm surprised. I'm very, very surprised. 85, when my first book hit the Times list, I was swamped with publicity. I couldn't believe it. There was all kinds of publicity in every kind of magazine, and it started to peter off a little bit. But still, I've always gotten good reviews. And I've built up the one in 1985 was Glitz, and I think it was on the list for 16 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm on the list for 4 or 5 weeks, but it's enough. You know, it's plenty. So I'm very, very happy the way the books are going.
Well, in Oklahoma, we're certainly flattered to be one of your new major locations. Thank you for being here, Elmore Leonard.
Thanks, Teresa.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Jackie Cooper Volvo supports numerous community projects and is proud to be a sponsor of Writing Out Loud.